Every morning, Sophie served coffee with a smile. She helped an old man, not knowing that her small acts of kindness were about to pull her into a world of secrets, billion-dollar fortunes, and dangerous family rivalries. What started as a simple routine would soon change her life forever. The cafe smelled of fresh coffee, baked bread, and the faint hint of vanilla from her morning pastries. Sunlight spilled to the tall windows, dust motes dancing lazily in its golden glow. Sophie wiped a smear of condensation from one of the panes and took a deep breath. Another day had begun, the same as any other, or so she thought. At 24, Sophie had learned to carry her life in measured steps. Work, bills, family, and the occasional moments stolen for herself. She had no illusions of grandeur. Her dreams were modest: a stable job, a warm home for her younger sister Lily, and perhaps, someday, the chance to travel beyond the small town she had always called home. Every morning, just as the clock struck 8, the bell above the cafe door jingled, and a man shuffled in. Frail, with thin white hair and slightly stooped shoulders, he moved with the cautious rhythm of someone aware of every creaking floorboard beneath him. Mr. Howard, as Sophie called him in her head, never spoke much at first. He didn't need to. His presence alone filled the space with quiet dignity. "Good morning, sir," Sophie said as she approached, her tray balanced perfectly on her hand. "Morning, dear," he replied, his voice soft but clear. He gestured toward his usual corner table by the window. "The usual, if you don't mind." Sophie smiled. She knew exactly what he meant. Black coffee, a slice of blueberry pie, and the scrambled eggs he never finished if she didn't remind him to eat slowly. Over time, she had noticed a subtle pattern. He sometimes left his wallet on the table, fumbling with coins and notes, clearly confused by simple transactions. Without making a fuss, Sophie would quietly cover him, slipping the coins into her apron pocket before he noticed. It wasn't charity, not really. She didn't think of it that way. It was kindness, the kind you didn't measure in dollars or cents. And it made her mornings feel lighter, her heart a little fuller, even when the cafe seemed more crowded with chatter than usual. The other regulars were already there, murmuring over newspapers and breakfast plates, sipping steaming cups of coffee as they discussed local politics and gossip. But Sophie noticed, as she always did, that Mr. Howard's eyes rarely lingered on the town chatter. He seemed lost in thought, as if listening to voices only he could hear. This morning, as she set down his coffee, he looked up with a faint smile. "You always know just what I need," he said, and for a moment, the world outside the cafe vanished. Sophie felt a twinge of warmth. Moments like this were rare, and she cherished them. "You're welcome," she said, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. After breakfast, she walked him to the door, holding the umbrella over his head as the rain began to fall in soft, persistent sheets. "Don't rush," she said gently. "Take your time." He nodded, gripping the umbrella handle tightly. "You're too kind, Sophie." She laughed lightly, hiding the pang in her chest. "It's nothing. Everyone deserves a little kindness in the morning." As he disappeared down the wet cobblestone street, Sophie returned to the cafe, shaking her umbrella dry. The bell jingled again, but her mind lingered on Mr. Howard's words. Kindness. It seemed so simple, yet sometimes it felt like the hardest thing to give. Little did she know, this small act, repeated every morning, would soon ripple far beyond the warm walls of the cafe, drawing her into a world she could never have imagined. Sophie moved through the cafe like clockwork, refilling coffee cups, clearing crumbs from tables, and answering the occasional question from a regular with practiced patience. She had long since learned to read the rhythm of the morning. The soft clinking of silverware, the low hum of conversation, the occasional burst of laughter from a corner table. And always in the corner by the window, Mr. Howard would sit, a quiet observer of the world around him. Over time, their morning encounters had become a ritual, almost comforting in their predictability. Sophie would prepare his coffee just the way he liked it, black, with a single sugar cube on the side, and place his plate of eggs and toast exactly at the same angle on the table. She had even started leaving a few extra pastries, knowing he enjoyed nibbling slowly, savoring the flavors without thinking of the clock. "Good morning, Sophie," he said, looking up as she approached. There was a faint warmth in his eyes today, a glimmer of amusement that hadn't been there before. "Morning, Mr. Howard," she replied, adjusting the napkins neatly beside his plate. "I brought you an extra croissant. I thought you might like it." His eyes lit up and a soft chuckle escaped him. "You always think ahead. That's very unusual." Sophie smiled, brushing the compliment off. "I'd just like to make sure you're comfortable." Over time, Mr. Howard had begun sharing snippets of his life. Tales of distant cities, quiet beaches, and libraries filled with books no one had read in decades. He spoke of adventures that seemed almost impossible for someone his age, yet his voice carried a weight of truth that made Sophie listen enraptured. "You've seen a lot of the world, haven't you?" she asked one morning, leaning on the edge of his table. "Perhaps," he said thoughtfully. "But it's not the places that matter. It's the people we meet along the way. Some leave a mark, others just pass through." His gaze lingered on hers for a moment, searching, as if trying to decide whether she was on the former or the latter. Sophie's heart swelled. She wasn't sure why, but she felt an instinctive urge to protect him, to ensure his small routines remained untouched by the chaos of the outside world. She began tidying his table with more care, arranging his napkins just so, folding his newspaper along the edges, so he could read it easily. She even started keeping track of the books and magazines he seemed to enjoy, setting them aside for him before he arrived. Her co-workers noticed. "You're spending too much time on that old man," one of them teased, handing her a stack of dirty plates. "What, are you falling for him or something?" Sophie laughed, brushing off the comment. She didn't care. There was something quietly compelling about him, something that transcended age or wealth, or so she thought. She liked the trust he placed in her, the small moments of connection that made her mornings brighter than the weak sunlight streaming through the cafe windows. Yet there were subtle hints that all was not as simple as it seemed. Mr. Howard would occasionally glance toward the door with unease, as if expecting someone or something. On rare occasions, his hand would tremble slightly when reaching for his coffee, and he'd mutter words under his breath, almost as if talking to someone invisible. Sophie noticed, but she never asked. Respecting his privacy felt like another way to show kindness. One rainy morning, as she handed him his coffee, he paused. "Sophie," he said softly, his voice almost a whisper, "you have a very kind heart. I hope you understand how rare that is." Sophie blushed, fumbling with the coffee pot. I just do what I can," she said quietly. "Morning, Mr. Howard," she replied, adjusting the napkins neatly beside his plate. "I brought you an extra croissant. I thought you might like it." His eyes lit up and a soft chuckle escaped him. "You always think ahead. That's very unusual." Sophie smiled, brushing the compliment off. "I'd just like to make sure you're comfortable." Over time, Mr. Howard had begun sharing snippets of his life. Tales of distant cities, quiet beaches, and libraries filled with books no one had read in decades. He spoke of adventures that seemed almost impossible for someone his age, yet his voice carried a weight of truth that made Sophie listen enraptured. "You've seen a lot of the world, haven't you?" she asked one morning, leaning on the edge of his table. "Perhaps," he said thoughtfully. "But it's not the places that matter. It's the people we meet along the way. Some leave a mark, others just pass through." His gaze lingered on hers for a moment, searching, as if trying to decide whether she was on the former or the latter. Sophie's heart swelled. She wasn't sure why, but she felt an instinctive urge to protect him, to ensure his small routines remained untouched by the chaos of the outside world. She began tidying his table with more care, arranging his napkins just so, folding his newspaper along the edges, so he could read it easily. She even started keeping track of the books and magazines he seemed to enjoy, setting them aside for him before he arrived. Her co-workers noticed. "You're spending too much time on that old man," one of them teased, handing her a stack of dirty plates. "What, are you falling for him or something?" Sophie laughed, brushing off the comment. She didn't care. There was something quietly compelling about him, something that transcended age or wealth, or so she thought. She liked the trust he placed in her, the small moments of connection that made her mornings brighter than the weak sunlight streaming through the cafe windows. Yet there were subtle hints that all was not as simple as it seemed. Mr. Howard would occasionally glance toward the door with unease, as if expecting someone or something. On rare occasions, his hand would tremble slightly when reaching for his coffee, and he'd mutter words under his breath, almost as if talking to someone invisible. Sophie noticed, but she never asked. Respecting his privacy felt like another way to show kindness. One rainy morning, as she handed him his coffee, he paused. "Sophie," he said softly, his voice almost a whisper, "you have a very kind heart. I hope you understand how rare that is." Sophie blushed, fumbling with the coffee pot. I just do what I can," she said quietly. "No," he insisted, placing a frail hand over hers. "It's more than that. Most people see things and ignore them. They walk by and pretend not to notice. But you see. That is a gift, Sophie, and gifts like that should never be taken lightly." For a moment, the cafe fell silent around them. Sophie felt the weight of his words, the sincerity in his gaze. There was a depth to him she couldn't explain, a sense that his life had been far more complicated than the peaceful morning suggested. As the morning crowd filled the cafe, Sophie walked him to the door, her umbrella shielding him from persistent drizzle. She felt a strange mixture of contentment and unease, happy to help, yet aware that the world outside the cafe might not always be so gentle. As he shuffled down the cobblestone street, Sophie caught a glimpse of him looking back. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, it was as if the rest of the town had disappeared. She turned back into the cafe, unaware that this quiet routine, these simple acts of kindness, were the first threads in a story that would soon unravel her life in ways she could never imagine. The cafe hummed with a familiar morning rhythm. Coffee machines gurgling, plates clinking, and Sophie moving like a well-oiled machine among the tables. She had just refilled a latte when the bell above the door jingled, a sound she had heard countless times. But this time it was different. Through the glass, Sophie noticed sleek black cars pulling up along the cobblestone street. 4 men in dark suits stepped out, their posture rigid, sunglasses reflecting the morning light. Something about them felt official, almost menacing. She frowned, instinctively checking the door as a heavy tread of polished shoes echoed across the floor. Behind them, 3 sharply dressed individuals in more conservative business attire followed, each carrying briefcases and wearing an expression of stern purpose. The cafe's atmosphere shifted instantly. Regulars glanced around nervously, whispering. Sophie's chest tightened. She had never seen anything like this in their quiet town. Then, slowly, a familiar figure emerged. Mr. Howard, frail as ever, was being escorted down the street by one of the suited men. His eyes flicked toward the cafe window, catching Sophie's gaze for the briefest instant. There was a tension there she hadn't seen before, a tightness in his jaw, a flicker of anxiety in his pale eyes. Sophie felt a pang of worry. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped forward. "Mr. Howard, are you all right?" she called, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. He gave her a faint, reassuring nod. "I'm fine, Sophie. Go on with your morning." But before she could respond, the 4 men, the bodyguards, pushed open the cafe door with a quiet authority. Their presence alone silenced the room. Patrons froze, forks suspended midair, eyes darting nervously between the newcomers and Sophie. One of the men, tall and broad-shouldered, cleared his throat. "We need to speak with Mr. Howard privately," he said, his tone polite but unmistakably firm. Sophie's stomach twisted. "Privately? But he's been here every morning. He likes his routine," she protested, stepping slightly forward. Mr. Howard's voice was soft, but edged with urgency. "Sophie, it's all right. Please, just continue your work." The lawyers and bodyguards moved with precision that suggested this was not their first mission. They surrounded him gently but firmly, guiding him toward a corner of the cafe and then toward the side door. Sophie noticed his hands tremble slightly, a subtle reminder of his age and vulnerability. As they ushered him out, one of the lawyers, a sharp-eyed woman with a clipboard, paused and looked directly at Sophie. "Do not follow," she said, her gaze icy but professional. "This is strictly between us and Mr. Howard." Sophie's heart pounded. She wanted to ask questions, to insist on knowing what was happening, but something in the lawyer's tone warned her against it. She swallowed her fear and nodded, returning to the counter with shaky hands. The cafe was unusually quiet after they left. The regulars whispered, speculating about what could have brought such a sudden and serious entourage to their small town. Sophie cleaned the table absent-mindedly, her mind racing with questions. Why did he need 4 bodyguards? What legal matters could possibly concern a man like Mr. Howard? Later that morning, she found herself staring out the window, watching the black cars disappear down the street. The simple routine that had defined her mornings now felt fragile, almost surreal. For the first time, she wondered if she truly knew the man she had been helping every day. And somewhere deep down, a small, uneasy voice whispered, something significant was about to happen, and her life, too, would never be quite the same. By mid-morning, the cafe had regained some of its usual rhythm, but the tension from the earlier visit lingered like a shadow over the tables. Patrons whispered in hushed tones, glancing at Sophie as she refilled coffee cups and wiped down counters. It seemed everyone had caught wind of the strange black cars, the suited bodyguards, and the mysterious lawyers. "Did you see that?" One regular whispered to another. "For bodyguards for an old man? I heard he owns half the buildings downtown." Sophie froze mid-step, gripping a coffee pot. Half the buildings downtown? That couldn't be right, could it? She shook her head, trying to dismiss the thought. Mr. Howard had always seemed so humble, so unassuming. How could someone so frail and quiet hold such power? But the rumors spread like wildfire. "I heard he's a billionaire, hiding in plain sight," someone else whispered from the corner. Another patron added, "And I heard the family's in some huge legal battle. That's why the lawyers were here." Sophie felt a mixture of disbelief and unease. She had known Mr. Howard as a gentle, slightly forgetful man who enjoyed morning coffee and a quiet chat. The idea that he was embroiled in high-stakes legal battles, surrounded by wealth and danger, seemed surreal. She poured herself a cup of water and leaned against the counter, thinking back on the mornings she had spent helping him. Every small act, the extra croissant, the neatly folded newspaper, the careful way she carried his coffee, had been motivated by kindness, not ambition. Yet now, the whispers of fortune and power made her wonder. Had she been naive? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the bell above the door. Sophie turned to see a small envelope resting on the counter, addressed in neat, looping handwriting. For Sophie. Please keep safe. No one was in sight. She looked around, but the cafe appeared empty. Carefully, she picked up the envelope, weighing it in her hands. Something about it felt important, urgent, even slightly mysterious. She slid it into her apron pocket, debating whether to open it immediately or wait until she was alone. Finally, during a brief lull, she slipped into the storage room at the back of the cafe, away from prying eyes. With trembling hands, she tore open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored paper, the words written in an elegant, almost old-fashioned script. "Only the kindest heart can help me now. Don't trust appearances. Watch closely, and you will know who truly deserves your trust." Sophie's pulse quickened. She read the note twice, then 3 times trying to make sense of it. Who had sent it? Was it Mr. Howard himself? The cryptic message sent a chill down her spine. It seemed to hint at something far bigger than a simple cafe routine. Her mind raced. Could this be connected to the sudden arrival of lawyers and bodyguards? Was Mr. Howard's secret more complicated than she had imagined? The day passed slowly, Sophie's thoughts constantly returning to the note. Each time she glanced at the empty corner where Mr. Howard usually sat, she felt a pang of concern. Something was happening in his life that he couldn't or wouldn't share with her yet, and somehow she was now a part of it. As evening fell, the cafe emptied, leaving only the soft hum of the espresso machine and the occasional clatter of dishes being stacked. Sophie stood by the window, watching raindrops trail down the glass, reflecting the dim streetlights. Her heart was heavy with curiosity and unease. Yet there was a strange thrill in the unknown, a sense that her simple acts of kindness had set her on a path she could never have anticipated. And somewhere in the quiet of the night, Sophie knew one thing for certain. The life she had known was about to change forever. The following evening, the cafe had long since emptied, leaving only the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint aroma of coffee lingering in the air. Sophie was stacking chairs when she heard the familiar, cautious creak of the front door. "Mr. Howard?" she called softly, wiping her hands on her apron. He stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him. This time he was alone. No lawyers, no bodyguards. Just a frail old man she had come to care for so deeply. But there was a weight in his eyes she had never seen before, an intensity, a vulnerability that made her heart tighten. "Sophie," he began, his voice quieter than usual. "Thank you for waiting." "Of course," she replied, setting down the dishes. "Is everything all right?" He shook his head slightly. "Not exactly. There are things I've kept hidden, things that I've never shared with anyone. But I trust you, and I think it's time you knew the truth." Sophie felt a flutter of nerves. She had suspected there was more to Mr. Howard than met the eye, but nothing had prepared her for this. He gestured for her to sit, and she obeyed, perching on a stool across from him. He cleared his throat and began. "I am not just an ordinary man," he said, choosing his words carefully. "I am the last surviving member of a wealthy family dynasty. Over the years, I have watched greed and betrayal tear apart those I trusted most. I have kept a low profile, hiding my fortune from the world and from people who might exploit it." Sophie's eyes widened. She had suspected wealth, but this was beyond anything she could have imagined. Why tell me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He leaned back, studying her. "Because of you, Sophie. You've shown me a kindness that no one else has. You see me for who I am, not for what I have. Most people are tempted by money, by power. You've never shown even the slightest hint of greed." Sophie felt heat rise to her cheeks, embarrassed but deeply touched. I've just tried to be kind," she said quietly. "No," he said firmly. "What you've done is rare. And because of that, I need your help. I want you to be involved in a decision that could change both of our lives, but will require trust, courage, and integrity." He paused, letting the words sink in. Sophie felt a strange mix of excitement and fear. Her life had always been ordinary, predictable. Now, the quiet man she helped every morning was offering her something extraordinary. "There are people, family, lawyers, others, who would see my fortune taken from me or misused," he continued. "I need someone I can trust implicitly. Someone who will act with honesty and compassion, not ambition or greed. I believe that person is you, Sophie." She swallowed hard, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his words. "But me? I'm just a waitress." "Exactly," he said, a faint smile breaking through the tension in his features. "That is why I trust you. Your life is unclouded by desire for wealth. You help because it's the right thing to do, not because you expect anything in return. That is the rarest quality of all." Sophie's mind raced. She thought of the small gestures, the quiet mornings, the extra croissants and folded newspapers. She had never considered that these acts might have meaning beyond the cafe. And now, they were the very reason this man had chosen to confide in her. I don't know what to say," she admitted. "Say nothing for now," he replied gently. "Just promise me you will continue as you have. Observe, help, and trust your instincts. In time, you will understand everything. And if you remain true to yourself, there may be rewards, yes, but more importantly, you will know the value of kindness and integrity in a world that often forgets both." Sophie nodded slowly, feeling a mixture of awe, nervousness, and an unshakable sense of responsibility. She realized that this wasn't just about money or status. It was about trust, morality, and the choices she made every day. As she helped him to the door later that evening, holding the umbrella over his head as the rain began to fall, Sophie understood something fundamental. Her life, her quiet act of kindness, had set in motion events far greater than she could have imagined, and she was ready to follow the path, wherever it might lead. For the first time, the small-town waitress felt like she had a purpose beyond serving coffee and pastries. A purpose intertwined with trust, integrity, and a secret that could change everything. The morning light spilled to the cafe windows, illuminating the familiar tables, chairs, and coffee machines. But for Sophie, the comfort routine had begun to feel fragile. since Mr. Howard had revealed his secret. The world outside her small cafe seemed different, larger, and far more complicated. She had arrived early, preparing his usual table with extra care. As she set down his coffee and carefully folded the napkins beside his plate, she noticed the first subtle signs of a new tension. A few regulars lingered longer than usual, glancing curiously at her, whispering. Sophie's instincts told her that word had already begun to spread about Mr. Howard, his wealth, and perhaps her role in his secret. When Mr. Howard arrived, he greeted her with the faintest of smiles, but there was a seriousness in his eyes she had never seen before. "Sophie," he said quietly, "today begins a test. I need to know that you can remain steadfast, even when faced with temptation or pressure." Sophie felt a knot in her stomach. "A test?" she asked, uncertain. "Yes," he replied. "The world around us is not always kind or honest. Some will see your association with me as an opportunity to gain something. Others may try to intimidate or manipulate you. I need to know if you can act with integrity, without being swayed by greed or fear." Her hands tightened around the coffee pot. She understood the weight of his words. This was not about serving pastries or keeping tables clean. It was about navigating a world she had never imagined, one filled with power, wealth, and hidden agendas. As the day unfolded, Sophie faced her first challenges. A woman in her early 30s approached the counter, offering to buy her an expensive gift in exchange for information about Mr. Howard. Sophie politely refused, her resolve firm. Later, one of the regulars casually mentioned a shortcut to financial success by connecting with Mr. Howard's family. Sophie smiled politely but said nothing, refusing to betray his trust. Even some of her colleagues began testing her. "Think about it, Sophie," one teased. "A few tips about Mr. Howard, and you could change your life overnight. Don't be foolish." Sophie shook her head. "I'm not foolish," she said calmly. "I'll do what's right, not what's convenient." Through it all, Mr. Howard observed silently from his corner, his eyes following her with a mixture of pride and reassurance. He occasionally offered subtle guidance, reminding her to trust her instincts, to pay attention to the character of those around her, and to act with patience and kindness even when the world seemed impatient. By mid-afternoon, Sophie realized that this test was about more than loyalty or honesty. It was about her ability to navigate complexity without losing her moral compass. She began noticing small things, the way people's eyes lingered on her, the subtle power dynamics in the cafe, the unspoken expectations of those who thought they knew her. One particularly tense moment arrived when a lawyer, previously unseen, arrived at the cafe with a discreet question. They asked about her motives, subtly hinting at the potential for self-interest or greed. Sophie met their gaze directly. "I help because it is the right thing to do," she said simply. "Not for reward, not for recognition, only for kindness." The lawyer's expression shifted slightly, part surprise, part grudging respect, but they said nothing further, leaving her with a quiet sense of vindication. As evening fell, Sophie closed the cafe and stepped outside. Rain began to patter gently against cobblestones. Her heart was tired but resolute. She understood now that Mr. Howard's challenge was not merely a test of obedience or courage. It was a measure of character, a way to determine whether she could be trusted with something far greater than herself. And Sophie knew the answer. She would continue to act with integrity, no matter what the world tried to throw at her. Because kindness, she realized, was not just a habit. It was a strength, one that could withstand even the most formidable pressures. As she watched the streetlights shimmer against the wet pavement, she felt a quiet determination settle in her chest. This was only the beginning. The real challenge, the one that would test her heart, her mind, and her spirit, was just beginning, and she was ready. The next morning, Sophie arrived at the cafe with a sense of purpose. The previous day's test had strengthened her resolve, but she sensed that the true challenge was about to arrive. She had heard whispers in town, gossip about Mr. Howard's fortune, his family disputes, and now her involvement. Some of the talk was admiring. Much of it was envious, curious, and even spiteful. By mid-morning, the tension became undeniable. 3 elegantly dressed individuals entered the cafe. Sharp suits, polished shoes, and expressions carefully practiced for intimidation. Sophie recognized them immediately from the description she had overheard. members of Mr. Howard's extended family. Their eyes flicked toward Mr. Howard's usual corner, and then at Sophie, as if measuring her presence and her worth. "Good morning," Sophie said calmly, moving toward them. Her voice betrayed none of the apprehension she felt inside. The eldest, a man with a cold, calculating expression, stepped forward. "You must be Sophie," he said. "We've heard a lot about you." Sophie nodded politely. "And you must be Mr. Howard's family?" He chuckled, a sound without warmth. "Indeed. We've come to clarify your role here. After all, our family's affairs are serious matters. We can't have outsiders influencing decisions." Sophie felt a flicker of anger, quickly controlled. She knew that if she allowed emotion to govern her words, she would lose the advantage her integrity gave her. "I don't seek to influence anything except kindness," she said steadily. "My loyalty is to Mr. Howard, not to wealth, power, or status." Their expressions darkened, but before they could respond, Mr. Howard entered quietly from the back, leaning slightly on his cane. His presence immediately commanded attention. "Enough," he said firmly. "Sophie is no outsider. She has shown integrity, compassion, and discretion, qualities that most of you failed to demonstrate years ago. She is my trusted confidant, and anyone who challenges her role will be reminded that trust is earned, not demanded." The family stiffened, but they could not deny the authority in his voice. Lawyers, who had quietly arrived earlier, whispered among themselves, clearly impressed by his decisiveness. Even the most skeptical observers had to admit that Sophie's composure and Mr. Howard's confidence formed an unshakable front. Still, subtle attempts were made. Some family members tried to question her motives, suggesting that she might be manipulating Mr. Howard for personal gain. Others hinted at legal complications that might remove her influence entirely. Sophie listened carefully, responding with calm dignity. She explained her perspective, focusing on honesty, kindness, and the quiet devotion that had guided her daily interactions with Mr. Howard. Slowly, tension began to shift. Mr. Howard's endorsement, combined with Sophie's unwavering composure, created a powerful statement. Even the lawyers, who initially appeared skeptical, nodded in quiet approval. One particularly bold relative attempted a final maneuver, insinuating that Sophie had secretly sought to benefit financially. Sophie looked him in the eyes and said firmly, yet without accusation, "I help because it is the right thing to do. Nothing more, nothing less. You may speculate, but my actions are my own, and they speak for themselves." The room fell silent. Her words, simple yet honest, carried a weight that no amount of wealth, authority, or intimidation could outweigh. The family, grudgingly and silently, accepted her presence. Even if they did not fully understand her, they could not deny her strength. Mr. Howard placed a hand lightly on Sophie's shoulder, a gesture of reassurance and gratitude. "You've done well," he whispered. "Integrity is rare. Today, you have proven yours beyond question." Sophie exhaled, feeling the tension lift from her shoulders. She realized that this confrontation was not just about wealth or inheritance. It was about character, morality, and the ability to stand firm in the face of pressure. As the family finally withdrew, Sophie returned to her duties, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. She knew that challenges would continue. That life with Mr. Howard's secret was complex, but she also knew that she had proven her worth. Not through ambition, greed, or cunning, but through simple act of honesty, kindness, and unwavering integrity. And for the first time, Sophie allowed herself to feel a quiet triumph, knowing that she had faced not only the scrutiny of others, but the inner test of her own principles, and emerged steadfast, unshaken, and stronger than before. The first morning after the confrontation with Mr. Howard's family, Sophie arrived at the cafe with a sense of calm she hadn't felt in months. The storm of uncertainty, the tension of scrutiny, and the weight of tests had passed, leaving only the quiet satisfaction of integrity fulfilled. Her mornings had always been about simple acts, folding a newspaper just so, arranging napkins, carrying coffee carefully to a frail old man. Now, those small gestures had grown into something far larger, an acknowledgement of her character, her strength, and her unwavering kindness. Mr. Howard greeted her with a warm smile, leaning lightly on his cane. "Good morning, Sophie," he said. "Ready for your new role?" Sophie nodded, unsure how to respond. The new role was still abstract, yet she felt its significance in every step she took. Over the following weeks, life slowly adjusted to changes. Mr. Howard began mentoring her, sharing insights from his vast experience managing a family fortune, making decisions that balanced business acumen with ethics. He taught her about investments, philanthropy, and the responsibility that came with wealth. Lessons that felt overwhelming at first, but gradually became a source of confidence. Meanwhile, Sophie invested in the cafe, modernizing equipment while keeping the cozy, inviting charm that made it a community haven. She offered small scholarships to local students, expanded the menu with healthy and affordable options, and even employed a few teenagers from town, giving them opportunities she had once longed for herself. Through it all, Sophie remained humble. She never flaunted her new responsibilities, never let the wealth or power cloud her original purpose. She continued to serve coffee with the same care, fold napkins with the same precision, and greet customers with the same warmth. The town noticed the difference. People respected her not only for her integrity, but also for her humility. She had grown, but she had not changed. One afternoon, as Sophie served a slice of pie to a shy elderly woman, she glanced at Mr. Howard, sitting quietly in his usual corner. He caught her gaze and nodded subtly, a small smile playing on his lips. In that moment, Sophie understood that the essence of their relationship had not changed. The connection built on trust, kindness, and mutual respect remained the same, even as the world around them had shifted dramatically. At home, Sophie shared moments with her sister Lily, who marveled at her new confidence and calm assurance. The two of them laughed, cooked together, and reflected on how life had changed, yet remained deeply connected to what truly mattered: family, compassion, and honesty. Sophie often thought back to the first morning she had met Mr. Howard. She remembered the simplicity of her acts, carrying an umbrella, offering extra pastries, folding his newspaper, and the quiet satisfaction she felt in helping someone without expectation. Now, those small gestures had become the foundation for a life she had never imagined, a life of influence, responsibility, and trust. As the cafe's lights dimmed at the end of another busy day, Sophie paused by the window, watching the evening settle over the town. Rain glistened on the cobblestones, and the warm glow from the cafe spilled onto the street. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, a knowledge that, through kindness and integrity, she had not only changed her own life, but had also touched the lives of those around her. Mr. Howard sat back in his chair, quietly observing her work. For the first time, he allowed himself a relaxed sigh, knowing that Sophie had not only met the challenges he had set before her, but had exceeded them. In a quiet way, he felt the future was now secure, not just for himself, but for Sophie, the person who had earned his trust through simple acts of unassuming courage. And in that small, warm cafe, Sophie realized that a new beginning had not only arrived, it was hers to shape, guided by integrity, humility, and the enduring power of kindness. The morning sun cast a golden glow over the small town, illuminating the familiar streets, cafes, and shop fronts. The gentle hum of daily life had returned, but now there was a sense of quiet admiration for Sophie, the young waitress who had become much more than she appeared. Inside the cafe, Sophie moved with her usual grace, balancing plates of steaming food and pouring coffee with steady hands. Her smile greeted every customer, from familiar regulars to new faces who had heard of the remarkable young woman who had earned the trust of the town's most secretive resident. Despite the changes in her life, Sophie remained humble. She continued to serve with patience and warmth, to fold napkins and arrange newspapers, and to leave small gestures of kindness wherever she could. She had learned that true influence was not measured by wealth or power, but by the quiet impact one had on the lives of others. Mr. Howard arrived as always, seated in his corner, quietly observing the cafe and the people within it. He had entrusted Sophie with his secrets, his fortune, and his legacy, but more importantly, he had shared with her the lessons of life: compassion, integrity, and the courage to remain kind even when the world was less than kind. Sophie's days were filled with purpose. She invested in the cafe, helping struggling townsfolk, mentoring young employees, and providing opportunities for those who had none. Yet she never let her success overshadow the simple joys she had always valued: a warm greeting, a shared laugh, and the satisfaction of doing good, without expecting anything in return. On quiet mornings, when the cafe was still and the sunlight streamed through the windows, Sophie would glance at the empty corner where it all began. She remembered the frail old man who had entered her life, the cryptic notes, the tests of integrity, and the challenges that had seemed so daunting at the time. Each moment had shaped her, teaching her that kindness was more than an action. It was a strength, a compass that guided every choice she made. Sometimes new visitors arrived, elderly men or women, strangers passing through the town. Sophie greeted them with the same warmth and care she had always offered, carrying forward the lessons she had learned. She realized that the ripple effect of kindness could extend far beyond a single cafe or a single life. Mr. Howard, sitting quietly in his corner, caught her gaze and gave a faint nod. In that silent gesture, Sophie understood the bond they shared, built not on wealth or obligation, but on trust, respect, and the quiet courage to act with integrity. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows over the cobblestones, Sophie cleaned the last few tables and closed the cafe doors. She paused for a moment at the window, looking out at the town she had always loved and the life she had never imagined. Her heart was full, her spirit calm, and her purpose clear. In the end, it had not been wealth or power that defined her journey. It had been the simple act of kindness, the courage to remain true, and the ability to see and honor the humanity in another person. And as she walked down the quiet streets, she knew that life, though unpredictable, could be beautiful when guided by integrity and compassion. The cafe lights dimmed, the town settled into evening, and Sophie, the young waitress with a kind heart, continued her quiet legacy, one act of goodness at a time, leaving a trail of warmth that would be remembered long after the doors closed. Sophie's kindness had started as a small gesture, a coffee here, a croissant there, but it became the foundation for trust, integrity, and a new life she never imagined. In the end, it wasn't wealth or power that defined her story. It was her heart. And sometimes one act of kindness is enough to change everything.